2:01. Call to order the Sparks City Council meeting of Monday, July 23rd with a roll call, please.
Mayor Martini?
Here.
City Clerk Patterson here. Council members Ratty? Here. Lawson? Here. Smith?
Here.
Kerrigan?
Here.
Schmidt?
Here.
Assistant City Manager Driscoll?
Here.
City Attorney Adams?
Here.
Okay, we don't have an invocation speaker today, but if you'd all stand, our city clerk will give the prayer, please. Linda?
The guys in the back haven't turned this on yet. If you'll pray with me, please. Father God, we just come before you and thank you for this time. We thank you for the men and women that come here, Lord, and direct and guide the city. We thank you for all of the men and women that work in the city. And we thank you for this amazing community that cares about each other and cares about having a wonderful place to live. We ask your blessing. We ask your wisdom. We ask you, Lord, to just direct and guide. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Linda, for those kind words. Mr. Driscoll, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, next is comments from the public. If you want to speak under comments from the public, please fill out one of these cards. I only have one. It's Kathy Brandhorst. You have 3 minutes, Ms. Brandhorst.
My name is Kathy Brandhorst, Lisa Marie Presley, John Benet Ramsey, John Steele, and I'm also the United States President. I just wanted to let you know we are still having problems with people erasing jobs out of the system and putting their name in the system because they need a job and to steal a payroll check. And I just wanted to briefly let you know that's going on quite a bit all over the cities, both cities, Reno and Sparks. And it doesn't seem like it's lifting at all because the Mexico border is still open and they're still coming across the border and into the United States. These people are now wearing white skin, so they're no longer black, Oriental, or Mexican. And I just wanted to let you know they're still here in our areas, and they will be executed and destroyed, but it takes a long time to get the proof. We still need the proof, and it's taken a long, long time, so a lot of us get into a lot of trouble. I have not really seen too much from the city council here. I told you about the police officers across the street, their own homes. But they are being murdered one by one because they do own a house. And the reason is they are filthy rich. They are not. They are workers, hard workers. They protect the public. And this is their job, and this should be their job. And I just wanted to let you know these people from Mexico still need a place to live. So they are going to murder anybody to move into their house, their home, their apartment, their room, no matter what facility that they live in. They need a place to live. And they still need money, so there are going to be a lot of bank robberies too. These banks are being bombed. They are going into the banks with their machine guns and their shotguns, and they are murdering the tellers, the people who are employed and employers in the banks, and they are going to get that money. No matter how they're going to get that money, you're going to be dead. And that's the only way they'll get the money, bank robberies. And I just wanted to let you know it's going to keep happening until somebody tries to help us a little bit more. And we do need a lot more help. There has been police officers found at the Virginia where I live right now, and we have 18 police officers held hostage. And the reason is because Schimmel is still alive, and we still have no way of knowing why. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else under comments from the public? Tough act to follow. Okay, next is approval of the agenda. Anybody want to take anything out of order? Mr. Kerrigan.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to move 6.3, that's the motion to conduct labor relations. Do we need that to after comments from the public? 9.2?
Yep. Okay.
Can we move it till after the redevelopment meeting instead?
Yeah, you can make that a motion.
Oh, I forgot we had that. Okay.
Yeah, after the motion can be to adjourn to after the redevelopment meeting.
I'll make that motion
I'll
then.
second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please vote, or please vote.
Aye.
Confused, dazed and confused.
Aye.
Okay. Passed unanimously. Mr. Schmidt is a yes. Okay. So we've approved the agenda. Recommendation to approve minutes of July 9th, 2012. Any omissions or corrections? If not, looking for a motion. Mr. Lawson moves. Second. Moved by Mr. Lawson, seconded by Ms. Ratty to approve the minutes of July 19, 2012. Any further discussion? Seeing none, please vote.
Aye.
Thank you. Passes unanimously. Mr. Smith is a yes. Schmidt, excuse me. Next is consent items, 5.1 through 5.9. Anybody want to pull a consent item?
I'd like to pull 5.2.
Okay, Mr. Smith. Anyone else? Not looking for a motion? Ms. Ratty,
To approve 5.1 and 5.3 through 5.9.
do you have a second?
Second.
I heard Mr. Kerrigan first. So we have a motion by Ms. Ratty, seconded by Mr. Kerrigan to approve 5.1 and 5.3 through 5.9. Any further discussion? Seeing none, please vote.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Mr. Schmidt was an aye. Okay, 5.2, Mr. Smith.
Okay, I just wanted to disclose my daughter works for this company. She does not benefit from it, nor do I, so I will be voting on this.
Okay, any further discussion?
Move to approve 5.2.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Moved by Councilman Smith, seconded by Councilman Kerrigan to approve agenda item 5.2. Any further discussion?
Just for the record, we've previously spoken with Councilman Smith, and it's the opinion of the city attorney's office that he can, in fact, vote on this particular matter.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Attorney. Okay, seeing no further discussion, please vote.
Aye.
Mr. Schmidt was an aye. Passes unanimously. Okay, let's move on to 6.1, presentation and possible direction regarding the Sparks zoning code analysis conducted by Clarion Associates and CFA of Reno. Mr. Rundle? That must be the, that's 6.2. So we just have them reverse. This in essence is 6.1. Okay.
Jim Rundle, Senior Planner here. To kick off this presentation, with me is Matt Goebel with CFA. Behind him, with Clarion. Behind him is Angela Foos with CFA. A couple meetings back, the City Council approved a contract so that Sparks staff could get a competitive contract to help us analyze our zoning code. The team here has helped us to do that. They've taken a outsider's perspective and looked into our municipal code, our design standards, our TOD, and they have a proposal as to what Sparks Council may consider doing with the zoning code. You may recognize Matt. We met with all of the city council. We met with planning commissioners, stakeholders development stakeholders from across the region, and tried to get their perspective on what they thought we needed to do with our zoning code. Last week on Thursday night, we met with the Planning Commission. Angela Foos made a presentation to the Planning Commission, and we tried to get some of their perspectives on what changes could be done to the zoning code. I'll point out a couple of the hot button issues that the Planning Commission brought up, and one of them was the TOD. Probably doesn't come as a huge surprise to the City Council. They did ask that, and the Planning Commission is aware that we will be bringing forward some amendments to the TOD as the Council has directed. And so the Planning Commission did ask that we have a study session, I think the last week of July, which is maybe next week, in 2 weeks, I think, that will address some of the TOD issues that are going on in the region, not just the City of Sparks, but what's been discussed at regional planning and those kinds of things. Another another issue the Planning Commission brought up was the industrial area, and that we should consider what uses we are permitting down there. Planning Commission has seen a lot of requests by special use permit to allow recreational uses, and they'd like to explore the permitted uses for the industrial area. And then a third issue that was brought up for more discussion was auto-oriented uses along Victorian and Prater. And we talked a little bit about those, but didn't come to necessarily in a resolution at the Planning Commission as to how we should move forward. Auto-oriented. This analysis that was done, we did it as a team with Clarion's team, CFA, and the Sparks staff. But we also wanted to make sure that Clarion could provide their professional opinion to the city. And so what I'd like to have occur here today is the Clarion makes the presentation to you. Some of their items we agree with, some of them we're not sure of, but we want to have it proposed to the council and have the council give us that direction. So from here, I'll turn it over to Matt, and I'll be right here in case you have any questions. Okay.
Thank you, Jim. Mr. Mayor, council members, thank you for the opportunity to present. It's good to see you all again. We have a PowerPoint presentation we're just trying to get up. There we go. Thank you. So again, it's good to see you all again. If you recall, we were here back in April for an intensive series of discussions with a lot of users of the Sparks Land Development Regulations, which is not just the zoning code per se, which is Title 20 of the Municipal Code, but also the TOD ordinances, the sign ordinances, the Design Standards Manual, a variety of things. The scope of the project is summarized on this slide. You all asked us to look at recommended code improvements to reduce barriers to development and investment in Sparks. We have put together a couple of work products for the city. The first one is this PowerPoint, which I'll walk through with you today, which summarizes the high points of our recommendations. And it covers short-term improvements and mid to long-term improvements, which are 6 months or more. You're also going to see all of these issues discussed in more detail in a report that we're putting together. We're finalizing that right now, and we'll get that a copy of that to you all pretty soon after this meeting, after we make some final revisions. All of the recommendations that we talk about today are based on, first of all, our review of your current code and just the work that we do around the country, around Nevada and northern Nevada, but also around the country in terms of drafting streamlined and effective codes, but also, in particular, the interviews that we did with you all and with stakeholders in the community. We have been very liberal in our report, and you'll see that in including anecdotes that we heard about from you all and quotes and things like that, because we tried to be as responsive as we could to the issues we heard from the community. So that was the scope of our work. And just to remind you, the staff did a nice job of putting together a cross-section of code users that we talked with. I think I talked with each of you all, either by phone or in the interviews. We talked with most members of the Planning Commission as well, talked with a variety of people that use the codes on a daily basis, developers, consultants, planners. Talked with folks that are focused on investment, in Sparks, Chamber of Commerce, real estate, et cetera, and also folks that are focused just on signs. Had a good series of meetings, and I would say by far the first topic that everyone wanted to cover was the TOD, as Jim mentioned. The way I've got this presentation structured is that the first slide for each topic covers issues, and then we'll get into short and long-term recommendations. In terms of the issues for TOD, there is a general belief that the TOD is standing as a barrier to investment in Sparks. We heard a lot of different anecdotes getting to that point. Some of them are grounded in fact and grounded in the actual regulations of the TOD, and some of them are more just kind of I don't want to say hearsay, but kind of the TOD has taken on this kind of aura of the burden, the barrier to a lot of different types of projects. Even when we investigated the anecdotes, some of the barriers were actually more building code issues, or some of the projects were actually in Reno, not really in Sparks. And so there's a big feeling that the Sparks TOD ordinance is a great barrier to development. In some cases, we saw that to be true. In some cases, not. We'll talk about these particular issues. TOD, kind of the issues are twofold. One is the geographic boundaries of the TOD. And I understand that you're already looking at possibly shrinking the eastern side of the TOD, so we'll talk a little bit about that. There was a general feeling that perhaps the geographic applicability of TOD was too broad. The substantive standards of the TOD are felt by some to be too strict, too ambitious. They're gold-plated standards. They're keeping people from coming in and investing their money in Sparks. Could be things like, where the parking is located on a site. Could be build-to lines. We heard about the Now Foods example from, well over a dozen folks. That's an example of how the standards are too strict. On the bottom of the slide, I say, the concerns are there, despite the fact that there's some caveats here. The TOD standards are not one size fits all. They were carefully tailored by the community to be calibrated. So the most intensive standards are at certain areas, mixed-use centers. There's less intensive standards in other areas, like the eastern part of the district. So they already are more calibrated than a lot of the community, I think, recognizes. And also the TOD manual is very good at incorporating a lot of menus and options. There's a lot of flexibility and creativity in there that I think a lot of people just don't appreciate yet. So one more caveat. And as I said, some of the anecdotes that we heard related to Reno projects and not Sparks. So that's a kind of a very quick overview of the issue. Short-term recommendations. We agree with the current proposal to remove the area east of Sparks from the TOD overlay district. It was included for good reasons. It was never intended to function the same way as a true TOD, but I think just given the current kind of perception and the fact that you can still accomplish some of those original intentions with other tools, I think it's fine to go ahead and remove that eastern area from the TOD overlay district. Just another shot of the TOD there with employment district on the right. Other recommendations for refining the TOD. Broaden the use of minor deviations for TOD projects. I'll talk about this concept of minor deviations several times. This is an authorization under Nevada statutes for the city to approve minor deviations from the strict letter of the law. Could be a set of parking standards, could be building height, it could be a setback. You have the authority to make deviations, to approve deviations up to 10%, so long as certain criteria in the statutes are complied with. You have an authorization in your Title 20 to use this minor deviation tool. It's not mentioned in TOD. A lot of the folks that were coming in under TOD weren't aware that this authority for a little bit of administrative flexibility was there.
Are you saying that the deviations are already in there that they can use? Or that's what we want to change?
There's an authorization in Title 20 to use deviations, but it's not clear that applies to the TOD manual. So that's one issue, is just drawing a clear linkage between Title 20 and the TOD manual so that you know that those minor deviations apply to the TOD standards. They're literally two separate manuals now. And this minor deviation is described over here, and people are wanting to use it over here. And we're saying, you need to draw a better linkage between those two. Does that answer your question?
Well, I think I've got the deer in the headlights look. No, I'm not quite sure what you're saying. But we have not been applying that in our use.
You have been doing it not very much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Other communities use it a little more than Sparks has used it. and I'm going to get more into the minor deviations on a subsequent slide, but the idea here is just to apply it more to the TOD standards. Also, just supplement the TOD development guide with materials and lists of frequently asked questions, things like that, to emphasize to people that there are a lot of opportunities for flexibility and creativity in these standards. It's not as rigid as people think it is, but I think you need to do a little bit better job of educating people about that. So that's another short-term issue. In terms of mid to long-term, you might want to look at more targeted amendments to the TOD standards. And we've got 3 suggestions up here. Reducing the minimum densities that are required, even though you're already below the regional minimums that are required by the regional planning agency. There's a requirement for a mix of uses in the TOD, and you might want to reduce or take away that requirement. And then you've got this build-to zone requirement that requires buildings to be brought up to the street, and you might want to limit or remove that standard in some places. Those are all possibilities, and I think they're all worth exploring. But I think it's very important to remember the original vision behind the TOD, and as you're considering whether or not to make these standards long-term, to think, if we reduce these minimum densities, if we reduce these build-to zones, will that ultimately frustrate our ability to make the whole puzzle work together if we start nicking away? So I think it's definitely worth having the conversation. Your TOD is a very broad area, and it could be that you want to be more tailored.
Just a comment, we go back to Now Foods on that. You're putting a building where all the other buildings are built to already. Mm-hmm. And the restrictions were saying, no, they couldn't do that. But that's the problem we have with that specific.
Right. I think there could have been more flexibility on that site.
So could they use a deviation there to approve it? It had to go through the planning commission, which they approved, so we never did see it here. But is that one of the instances they could have used it?
Probably not
Jim
the minor
Shagan said
deviation.
no.
Probably not the minor deviation. If you use the minor deviation, you've got a threshold issue of defining when you can use it.
It's got to be minor.
Which standards it applies to.
Okay. Well, and on that Vista Court order, there's only 1 or 2 lots over there now that they can actually use.
I wanted to clarify something too, Councilman Smith, on your question a few minutes ago. You'd asked, can the staff apply deviations to the TOD? And we have been. What Clarion's proposal and CFA's proposal was that we make it more, we advertise it more in the TOD. We have it, and the planners know it's in the Title 20. And we try to help people out use it in the TOD. But sometimes if they could just come in, what their proposal is, they come in knowing that they can use that because it's right there in that TOD manual. And that's the difference is.
Isn't there's something like 25 criteria? You have to meet 6 or 7 of them?
The minor deviation is a different tool. The variances, I think what you're thinking of, and we had to take that Now Foods forward to Planning Commission with a variance. But there's a section in the state law that says that administratively we can deviate from the code. So guy comes in and he wants to build his patio cover at 9 feet from his property line, and the code says 10 feet. We can sign off as that as staff and say that's a minor change, it's a foot, no big deal. Council doesn't even have to be notified about it, that kind of thing. And we've used that mechanism for a long time, but it's in a small section of the municipal code that not everyone is aware of. When people come in, we make them aware of it, but Clarion's proposal is that we advertise it a little bit more.
Okay, thank you.
Is there another question? Or no? Okay.
I'm the best, that's all.
Good questions.
You said it.
So that was one category of mid to long-term improvements, is just these changes to the standards. Another one is additional adjustments to the boundary later on. You know, once you get past this issue of the eastern side, maybe you want to tweak it even further. The final issue in this section is reevaluate city policy for auto-oriented uses along corridors, especially Prater, Victorian. Auto-oriented uses are really focused on the car. You know, it's the drive-throughs and it's the auto sales uses. It's things that are really designed to focus on the automobile, which are, you know, in some ways, you know, in conflict with the goal of a TOD, which is to focus more on the pedestrian experience and to more de-emphasize the use of the car. There is a goal, a policy right now as I understand it, to over time phase out those auto-oriented uses along the corridors. I think there was a sense that we heard from some people that maybe that should be reevaluated, and maybe that was just a little bit too forward-thinking. Maybe we should scale that back a little bit, just revisit that policy for some areas. So that's the category of issues on TOD. I'm going to switch gears now and talk about tools for flexibility and creativity. In addition to concerns about the TOD, we heard people say the system in Sparks is just too rigid. It's just not flexible enough. It's hard. Your standards are too high. It's hard to get stuff through the system. So just to tee this issue up, on the slide here, I've listed the ways that you do have flexibility already under your current regulations. You do have this minor deviation tool that I mentioned. It's a 10% adjustment, but it could be better drafted. You've also got a plan development tool, which y'all use a good bit. And then you've also got the variance tool. And that's not kind of in the same category. That's not just I want to be creative so I get a variance. You've got to demonstrate a hardship to get a variance. But it is a way of not having to comply with the strict letter of the law. So you do have these mechanisms in place right now that allow flexibility and creativity. We heard like I said, there's little awareness of that minor deviation tool, and there's still a general perception that the code is a barrier to development, despite the fact that you have these tools in place. So what do we recommend? Short term, broaden the awareness of and use of the minor deviation tool. This is just a graphic from another code, from another jurisdiction, but it's just an example of a code that is a little bit more explicit about the types of standards that might be subject to modification through this tool. Maximum fence height, minimum planting rate, maximum number of off-street parking spaces. The Las Vegas code is a good example of a code that is very specific in Nevada about where this authority can be used. It helps people kind of understand where they might have some flexibility. It helps you all set limits on where you want to have that flexibility be used. I'm not suggesting that you effectively lower the bar by 10% on everything that comes in. You need to have clear criteria that are enforced so that this is only used in exceptional situations. But, this is used around the country. It has been for years. It's a good way to grease the wheels. In our experience, it's typically used for mom and pop projects that want to do a very small project and they want to protect a mature tree out front, or they want to, do something to help, on a small constrained site, rather than having to go through we see it on that scale versus kind of the big scale plan development. So broaden the awareness of and use of that tool. Mid to long term, consider allowing bigger deviations from the code. And maybe that's through an SUP or maybe it's through some other tool. When I say bigger deviation, I'm saying something bigger than 10%. And this is clearly contemplated in state law. They clearly break down this idea of minor deviations versus more significant deviations. They talk about something even beyond 30%. The key differences, though, are that it's not a variance. You don't have to show a hardship. And there's a public hearing required. State law requires that there be more public process if you're going to actually grant people that level of flexibility. This is one of the recommendations that's stepping out there a little bit more. We didn't see a lot of use of this type of authority in the state. But, to our reading, it's authorized, and it's something that you might want to consider if you're really looking to reduce barriers. Another type of tool would be alternative compliance, alternative equivalent compliance, saying that if you've got a creative application that meets the spirit of the code but not the strict letter of the law, we'll entertain that application. Maybe you've got a building design proposal that's going to use metal on some of the building, and typically that would be prohibited in your building design standards. Maybe you'd let somebody make that proposal through this alternative compliance process. Several caveats about this. Got to go through a public hearing process. It's really a tool for the design-oriented standards. It's kind of different in kind from that minor deviation I talked about. This is more just kind of being creative and being different. You are giving people flexibility here, so I think you require something in exchange. You require some type of compensating public benefit. If you're going to extend to somebody an option to step outside the code, you ask for more open space, or you ask for better building design, or something. You have to open that door to a negotiated process. And then finally, very important, it requires careful drafting to consider what the acceptable alternatives might be. I put this in the mid to long-term category because this is not something you just draft right off the shelf. This is something that long-term, as you rewrite your code, you think individually for each section of the code, is this an area where we might entertain alternatives? If so, what would they be? You put some of those alternatives in the code. So it's another option. It's part of a long-term drafting strategy, but it's a way to introduce and allow flexibility and creativity. All right, other ways to streamline the code procedures. The issue here is that there might just be other ways to improve efficiency, reduce potential barriers to investment in the community. We heard that you've got a great planning staff. You've got a very hardworking city staff that manages a lot. And
Just Jim told you that?
he did.
Jim Rundle?
I quoted that, actually.
You wrote that down again.
But frankly, we also heard that there's problems with consistency. And we also heard that some people feel like, depending on the day, they might get a different response up at the building counter or from the staff. And uncertainty translates into dollars. It translates into maybe an unwillingness to invest in the community. So to the extent that you can provide more certainty, get people through to market faster, reduce discretionary review, that's a good tool for economic development in the community. So a variety of issues here. Short term, there's a number of things.
We have another question. Ms. Ratty, I'm sorry.
I guess I'm just curious. So part of my experience has been that sometimes the fact that that the law, frankly, doesn't allow for the kind of project that somebody wants to put in, we are therefore rigid. And so it seems to me like there's some folks that we're dealing with that they just want the ability to do whatever they want to do with their property in that space, and they don't believe that any constraints or only the most minimal constraints should apply. And then there, I think, that are others that are perhaps a little bit more, doing larger projects or doing more than one development, or, are a little bit more accustomed to long-term planning and the ways that cities are trying to improve their overall structure and footprint and do good land use, I guess. Where, there may have a more nuanced critique to be able to say, no, this is actually rigid. It's much harder here than it is someplace else, or something along those lines. So in your process, how do you distinguish between, because it seems to me like my experience has been the ones that are the loudest are the ones who, they just want to be able to do their project. Our laws don't allow for it. Therefore, we are rigid. And it's really no more than that, as opposed to some of the other perhaps more helpful critique where there's shades of gray and it's nuanced. How did you allow for that in this process? Or
Well,
how do you approach that?
I mean, we look, we try to be, we try to do a comparative analysis, based on all the work that we've done around the country, just to get kind of relative, senses of, what a typical set of landscaping standards might be, what a typical set of building design standards might be, what tools for flexibility are, and so we try to think, we listen to people and we listen to the complaints, and the developers are always going to complain about the process. They're always going to say they don't go through faster, but, we try to put that in context of what we've heard in other places. We look at the other codes in Nevada. We look at what the landscaping standards are in Reno versus the landscaping standards in Sparks to say, well, is there really a problem here? Are you more rigid than some other places? So it's the.
And I guess bottom line, did you find that we were more rigid or more difficult than anywhere else?
No, I think you have more of a perception problem. I think there's a sense that Sparks is more rigid. I think people are not aware of some of these tools that are already here. I think a lot of your substantive standards are right in line with other communities. I think, especially in TOD, you have more flexibility than people realize, than people give this code credit for. There's a lot of menus. There's a lot of optional ways to meet the goal of the code. And the few people that had really kind of taken a big project through that TOD that we talked to, not including Now Foods, they said, wow, this really works well. This is a big improvement over your base zoning code. So I think Sparks has started to move in the right direction with that TOD. And I think the use of those menus and optional approaches is something that should be carried forward in the rest of the code. People were complaining. I think a lot of people were complaining because they didn't understand what the rules were and how much flexibility, how much work you had already done to allow flexibility and creativity. Your question's great, but there's no bright line answer. Did that help? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So short-term ways to streamline the code. These are pretty straightforward. Administrative approval of minor amendments to approved permits. So think about an SUP. Think about somebody that wants to come in and do a change to an approved SUP. Rather than making them go back through the original approval process, which we understand is the case now, identify thresholds in the code that distinguish major versus minor, and say that the minor ones can be approved administratively, and the majors do have to go back through the original process. And there's a lot of examples of how you set those thresholds. Some people might say that, you might base it on, are you changing the non-residential square footage, or are you increasing the densities, or anything like over those thresholds might be big, and other stuff would be small. But we can give you a lot of examples of thresholds, but the point is just to set that threshold and let the smaller ones go through more quickly. And if you want, you can always start very, very small with those thresholds and increase over time if it seems like people are not abusing that system. Clarify the appeals procedures. Consider shorter appeal times. Right now, you have all administrative appeals. Well, you have an unusual system. You've got administrative appeals on the design standards manual going to this Board of Appeals, which I think is not meeting often at all. And then you have other administrative appeals going to the council. And you have more flexibility than that under state law. You have the authority to have a hearings examiner or to have all appeals go to the Board of Appeals. The issue here is just, trying to, free up your time as a council to work on big picture policy and getting some of those nitty-gritty, day-to-day details to another body. Shorten the appeals time as well. Right now you've got a 21-day appeal, and you can take that down to 10 under state law, and we heard a lot of people suggest that. That's just, getting people through the process faster. Extend permit approval times. Right now your SUP is good for 1 year, and we recommend you consider 2 or 3 years. There's a lot of communities that are doing this based on the economy. If somebody takes the time and effort to get through the process and get an SUP, they might need more time to get that project actually through to construction and through to finishing. So that's another recommendation. Mid to long term, this is again streamlining the process. Simplify the amendment process for the PD handbooks. We're not trying to change the original approval process for PD handbooks. That requires, going before the Planning Commission and the Council, both for tentative and for final. What we're talking about here is if you do have handbooks that are out there and people want to amend them because they consider they're out of date, they're not in tune with the current market, how can you get them through as quickly as possible? Distinguishing major from minor amendments would be a real help here. You are constrained by state law. You do have to still have that major and minor or tentative and final approval process for the handbooks. But it could be that you have fewer public hearings for things that you call minor versus major. Kind of that same idea I mentioned earlier. If you can identify some things that are minor, get them through a little bit faster. Reduce the amount of discretionary review. Discretionary review just means that somebody, a decision maker, has to go through a hearing process and go through a hearing to make a decision. It could be an SUP process. To the extent that you can take things out of that discretionary category and make them just approved by right, that's good for the economy. That's good to get people through the process. So if there were additional uses that you might not want to require an SUP for, you want to make them approved by right, that's another tool to use. You all have already done a lot of this, however. You changed a lot of uses from SUP to admin approval within the last, I think, year or so. So we asked the question several times to people, are there additional uses that you could shift down? And we heard no specific suggestions, but that doesn't mean that you might not want to think about that. I'm going to come back to uses in a couple of minutes and mention this again. If you do reduce the amount of discretionary review, you can have procedures in place to allow effective oversight. So you all as a council could always call up any staff applications to make sure that if you really needed to hear something, you could. Adjust information submission requirements by application type. That just means that you don't have a one-size-fits-all category of submittal requirements. Bigger projects, you need to have more information on. Smaller projects, you might be able to tailor those submittals and get them through faster. That means less money up front for the applicants for those small projects. We did not examine your list of submittals in detail, but that's something we've seen in other places that's been a problem. All right, my final section here is on just improving the overall code's organization and format. Look for ways to improve organization, clarity of the code. Again, this kind of gets just to the certainty issue, provides predictability and confidence in the system. If people know what the rules of developing in Sparks are, they're more likely to take the plunge and invest. I'm not saying that's the only issue by any means, but you can remove a barrier if they feel like there's not a confusing code and there's going to be a lot of negotiation. If they know what the rules are, that can help. So a number of things that you can do here. First of all, revamp the use classification system, the way that uses are defined and organized. A land use is just an airport versus a casino versus a single-family house, all those things. In your current zoning code, you've got a very old-school format, and you just have this kind of random list of uses that are allowed in each district. They're not even alphabetical. It's just kind of random. You have a different way of categorizing uses in TOD, which is up on this slide. There's a little bit of organization to that, which is really helpful, residential versus office, et cetera. And then you've got some organization as well in the new industrial districts that you used. But you really need to now step back and synthesize all those tools into one master table of uses that has the same terminology for all the different districts for the same types of uses. Similarly, you need to define all those uses. You have a number of uses in your current code. I'm not quite sure what they are, but they're not defined in the current code. And so comparison goods was one that was in your code now, and I haven't seen that one before. So that's just an example of how all these uses need to be defined. But short term, that wouldn't be that difficult to synthesize all those different uses. And then I mentioned also, considering administrative approval for additional SUPs. As you're putting that table together, you could be thinking about, can any S's be converted down to P's? Perhaps if you put some new standards in the code that control the impacts. So that's short term, but long term, you could do even more with your uses, and you could make it a more functional system. You could have bigger use categories like household living and group living. You could have individual use types within there. Ultimately, if you get better at defining those big use categories, you can make that second column shorter. You can have fewer specific uses. So comparison goods is probably going to go by the wayside ultimately and become part of a broader retail sales and service category. And you can think more logically. Your investors will see uses that are similar to what they see in Reno and surrounding communities. Ultimately, long term, as additional plans are done, you need to think this table approach will allow you to compare across districts, to really think through, are we implementing our plans? Do we have the right mix of uses for each district? We heard a number of examples of how, like right now, your current philosophy for SUPs appears a little random. We heard about the liquor stores that sometimes maybe don't require an SUP versus, I think, child care centers that do sometimes. We also heard a number of use types that are not adequately addressed in your current lists. Urban agriculture was an example of one that needs to be added to the code. So there's a lot of kind of just nuts and bolts cleanup that can be done to really improve the functionality of the code. Related to the uses is the industrial area in particular, kind of rethinking reevaluating city policy for that area and confirming, ultimately, do we want to preserve those industrial buildings or consider changes to the policy for that area? Improve the code's organization and format. This is pretty straightforward. Right now, you've got 4 separate documents that have your land regs. You've got Title 20, you've got the subdivision in Title 17, you've got TOD, you've got the Design Standards Manual. I've got your current Title 20 organization on the left there and a proposed new structure on the right. This is not rocket science, but a new organization can really be helpful to people that want to understand what the rules are for investing in Sparks. Put all the procedures together. Have one definition of development that applies to all these different, contexts. Don't have different sets of definitions in these different documents. You don't have a huge problem with inconsistency, but you could achieve a lot you could achieve more efficiency if you put all these together. Standardize the review process. We have a lot of experience working through kind of setting up a standard set of procedures for each application. Is there a pre-application conference required? Who do you submit the application to? Is there a staff review? How's that done? How's the public hearing done? Just standardizing the process. Doing this would help you get rid of a lot of just extra ink and potential inconsistencies in your code. Right now, you've got at least 4 different sections that define what a complete application is in Title 20. And they all say the same thing, which is good. But communities that have multiple versions of the same standard sometimes run into problems down the road when they get inconsistent with each other. More tools like this, more tools like a chart to help summarize, who makes what decision, who approves SUPs, et cetera, can really help improve organization and format. Like I said, a consolidated definitions list, better formatting, separate users guide. I think you took a huge leap forward with the TOD. It's really, from the people that have used it, we heard that it was well organized and user friendly. It's time, I think, to apply some of those lessons more broadly to the code itself. This is just an example of codes are kind of evolving. They're getting actually much more graphic. This is an example of one that we did for a different community that summarizes just on 2 pages all the key characteristics of the neighborhood residential district. You've got the purpose there. You've got all the dimensional standards. You've got a graphic of what the layout would typically look like on the bottom right. You've got an illustration of typical lot layout. You've got photos of what that district typically looks like. These types of things can really be helpful to the development community in showing this is what we want to improve here. You're going to get to yes quickly in neighborhood residential if you comply with these standards. So that's the list. These last 2 slides just summarize everything I've talked about, and you've got a copy of this in your files. Again, the short term is ideally things that could be handled within the first 6 months or so. The mid and long term would be longer term stuff. Some of it's easy, and some of it can be handled completely in-house, and some of it you need to go out to the public and have discussions about about some of these issues. So happy to entertain questions. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Questions? Okay, I do have a public comment. Mr. Trey Abney, come on up, Trey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. For the record, Trey Abney with the Chamber of Commerce. I want to thank Mr. Rundle and Armando and the rest of the team for inviting the Chamber to be a part of this conversation, this process. I think some of our state legislators could use some advice on how to reach out to the business community before they propose certain things. And I've talked to several of my members who were part of this process as well, and they really appreciated it. And we think these are some good steps to move forward with. I would urge the city to make this a constant process, to be constantly looking at your codes, your regulations, your fees, and all of your structures to make them more business friendly and more job creator friendly. And so anything we can do in this community and the rest of the communities in this valley to make it as easy as possible to develop a project, to create jobs, and to enhance our economic vitality, we think is a good one and good steps to take. And we appreciate this council and your staff for being willing to look at this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Trey. Appreciate it. Anyone else? Okay, Jim, what are you looking for here? To agree with the recommendations, make our own recommendations? What are you looking for?
I'd kind of like to see that the city council make some of their own recommendations based on the presentation, or make recommendations based on something they haven't even seen. For example, just have a discussion on Victorian Avenue, for example. It was, I'm going to guess, in the 1980s that a council made policy decisions to make that the tourist commercial area and remove auto-oriented uses along that corridor. Currently, the TOD seems to be taking the knocks for that, but that was a policy set up a long time ago. is that something that the council would like to have staff explore, whether those types of uses are appropriate, or if we should continue that policy forward. And essentially direct us based on the presentation on how you'd like to see staff move forward with these recommendations.
Okay, Mr. Smith.
One of the items we talked about, not necessarily the big companies moving into TODs, but the small operations that want to expand or something, and they were frustrated on the costs. They didn't know what they were going in when, and I know we've talked about this, about maybe getting some kind of a pamphlet. They could say, okay, this is going to cost me this much because this is what I'm doing. So they know going in, and I can't remember if you said you've got something like that, Jim, or...
You mean a pamphlet so they come in for building permit, what they should expect for entitlements?
What they should expect for fees.
Impact fees.
And I'll use the Wild Hog for an example. We talked about, they expanded a little bit, and then now they never did have to hook up the sewer. They're already hooked up, but now they're adding an additional
Right.
part of that. So now the fees, what they weren't expecting. So just something where the general public can come in and say, okay, we're thinking about remodeling, we're thinking about doing something. What's it going to cost me? And they can have some kind of an idea. They might not be right on, but
A ballpark.
a ballpark figure of what they can expect.
Right.
So if we could do something like that, I think that'd be very helpful.
Okay.
Mr. Lawson.
Just put my 2 cents in for Victorian and TOD and auto-related businesses on the west side of Rock Boulevard. To me, that doesn't make sense. We're holding a standard there. I don't think we're ever going to meet at this point. The east side of that would be Pyramid, going east. I think that's a good place to hold that standard. It's a well-viewed area from the freeway, so people get an idea of what our city looks like, just from that small stretch of road. So that's why I'm willing to hold a higher standard there.
Okay.
But the east side, or the west side rather, it's going to be many, many, many years before we ever see any change there because of just the way it was built in the beginning. And those uses are more auto and commercial type uses there than anywhere else.
Okay.
Anyone else? Mr. Schmidt, are you still with us?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'm still with you.
Okay. Pipe in if you got something.
I will.
Do you have something, Neil? Oh, that's Julia Ratty. Okay, go ahead.
So 2 things. I think potentially one of the most interesting things that you brought up is the industrial area along the river, and it seems to me like we need to have a larger conversation about some sort of visioning about, really, are we committing to keeping that industrial, or do we see, because it's along the river, some potential for a long-term strategy to do something different? We built a whitewater park down there in that general area, which obviously draws a completely different kind of use, and it comes up over and over again with the volleyball folks and all the different folks there. So I really think, and it's aging, we should probably do that night. Don't know that I'm necessarily sure on how we go about doing that, but I think it's probably larger than just an updating of the zoning code process.
It is.
It's probably a master plan process, but it does seem like we need to have some clarity around that whole part of our community and what we're trying to do there. And then the second piece, and I wasn't sure if I was completely following Mr. Lawson's comments about the auto-oriented uses, because I actually was thinking the other direction, that the farther you get out past Pyramid to the east, the more suburban in nature that corridor becomes, the more perhaps it's appropriate to have auto-oriented uses. And I was going less to the car lots and the things that are farther west, but more to the drive-ins and, where it's not likely that people are going to be walking to get their burger or their ice cream or their whatever, whereas as we go farther towards Reno or farther west, the more urban nature of that area, that's where we really want our density, that's where the rapid transit is supposed to come more quickly, and that's where we should be moving away from auto-oriented uses. And I tend to agree that some of those car lots and things have been there for a long time, but perhaps have some of the most potential to turn over because they have the least infrastructure, the least buildings. So I'm not sure if I'm not sure we're defining auto-oriented uses the same way either. So, but that would be my comments on that, is that the closer we get to Reno, the more opportunity there is for density, the more opportunity there is for walkable, livable, public transit, some of the things that we're trying to accomplish in a TOD. The farther we get out past Pyramid, the more suburban in nature those communities are, the less likely I think people are going to be walking.
Okay.
My only thoughts.
Mr. Kerrigan.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, the problem I have is that, when we were talking about TOD, let's just talk about TOD for a second. It was supposed to be something that it would be easier for somebody to develop. And it turns out that when we have that, then we have Now Foods come in, and we're almost turning down something to put out 500 jobs and a great company in Sparks. So whatever we need to do, that's what I'm afraid. I just want to change that part of it. In other words, if we have to do any kind of deviations, let's talk about those. Because I do not want to, I was a hard sell, if you remember, on TOD in the first place. Because I didn't think it was going to work. Well, it has in some places and hasn't in others. And that's what I'm afraid of, is that when you okay something like this, that you do have the potential of losing a good company. And in these times, we don't want to do that. Right. So I'm really, when I take a look at the short term, remove some of the I want you to come and tell me what we can make it easier for you, what kind of deviations. If we need to do the same thing we told purchasing when people don't know how to fill out this, remember when we told them, hold a class on how to fill this thing out so you won't get bumped. If that's what we need to do for minor deviations, because I would think that somebody would already have checked this out, okay? Like if you hire somebody to go and do the work for you, that they would already know that you can by state law have a minor deviation. But I mean, you know what? If we have to, maybe we need to educate people a little bit better on it.
And the staff, I think, is always. All three of your planners know about the minor deviation tool and have tried to use it whenever it promotes a good project. Would have used it on that Now Foods, but it exceeded what the state law says of the 10%. So we're using that tool as much as all the time, as much as it's practical. 10% sometimes isn't enough. So that's Clarion's proposal, was to do the major deviation and use it through the special use permit, kind of through a special use permit process, which is different than doing a variance because you don't necessarily have to show a hardship. And sometimes it can be very difficult for staff to create a staff report that shows, like the Now Foods, to create a staff report to recommend approval on a variance that doesn't show a hard, because it's not a hardship. So what that proposal was, and we've been working. And all of this is pretty new to us. I mean, the report came in late last week, and then you also get a written report. The presentation came in. So some of this stuff we're exploring with the attorney's office too, to get their 2 cents on how do we make some of this work.
Yeah, and like I said, I think I've told everybody, and Neil, I started off with Neil. I want you guys to be the ones that say yes to everything, and let us be the ones that say no. So whatever tools we need to give you to do that, let me know what it is. If it's what kind of deviations we need to go by. Because I hate we always hate to keep harping on the Now Foods, but that's a perfect example of a company that probably would have gone somewhere else if we wouldn't have been over and said we're going to move. We don't want to lose that.
Yeah.
And
you're right. And the irony is, like you say, the TOD was to make things easier.
Well, yeah. And now we're taking half of it out.
And it almost did. Except for that one design standard that we couldn't figure out. Otherwise, they'd have gone right to building permit, no zoning, no special use permit. They could have gone right in. But because of that, because of the parking situation, the building placement, we didn't have enough.
Yeah, and let's just use common sense sometimes, because if you drive down Vista, does it look any different than anything else we have down there? No. To anybody driving down there, no. It's in fact, it's a nice looking building. It probably looks better than half the stuff we have down there. So it was crazy. That's the kind of stuff that I really want to stay away from. And getting on Julie's point about the industrial area, I know there's a lot of people that are coming in with sports. Yes. Because there's a lot of empty warehouses down there. Now that's something we need to discuss, because do we want to have empty buildings, or do we want to, to have somebody utilizing those?
And that's a good
and my point is, let me just finish real quick, is I'd rather have somebody down there. And I know the biggest problem down there is parking.
Yes.
Okay, because when you have volleyball or you have a martial arts studio or whatever it is, you need more parking spaces, but I think we could work around that. So that's what and I think maybe real soon, we need to have maybe a half hour before our city council meeting where we just talk about this.
Okay.
Because I don't think it's kind of hard for us to kind of throw it around right now.
So-
I mean, I don't want to wait till, October to do this. I mean, like at our next city council meeting or the next one after that, let's cut out a half hour before and let's talk about this.
And that was actually something that I was going to recommend as kind of identifying a process forward. Is, you've heard the presentation from Clarion and CFA. We're going to get, their report here in very short order. My proposal is we share that report with you, we continue this conversation, and then we do, in fact, have a workshop with the council, ahead of a city council meeting.
Yeah, because I'd rather sit in on a workshop than go to the joint meeting tomorrow. So, if you want to do it tomorrow at 3 o'clock, let me know.
And as part of that workshop, I think what would be appropriate is for us as your staff to have reviewed that report and come forward with a series of action steps that we'll propose. That'll give you guys something, we'll bounce that off of you and we'll see what sticks and what other ideas you direct us to take forward. And then out of that workshop, we take some formal action, back to that three-phased approach, the short term, the medium term, and the long term.
That's what, then I'll call him Ms. Ratty, but that's what I'm looking for is from you guys is flexibility here. And you should be able to tell us legally what kind of flexibility you can have and what kind of flexibility that you can't have. So that's what I'm looking for, as flexible as it can be, where you guys can make decisions legally or have us bring things to us that you can approve or want to do, and we can approve them. So that's what I'm looking for. For me, it's all about flexibility, and as flexible as we can be, the better we are, I think. Ms. Ratty.
I like the idea of having a workshop, because what I was going to say is I don't really feel prepared to say yes, no, move on that, don't move on that.
Yep, understood.
I am curious, because Now Foods is the one that gets marched out over and over again as we might have missed this great opportunity. And I think I heard two possible solutions there. One would be that whole part of the corridor is just no longer TOD, and that would have solved it, because it's not appropriate to have TOD in that corridor.
Is on your agenda, that to start down that path is on your agenda later today.
And that's the thing that concerns me, because it always gets brought up as the example, but it isn't a part of the corridor that is very different than the rest of the TOD corridor, and frankly, was probably a stretch to call that part of the corridor TOD from the very beginning by any national standard.
I would call it aspirational.
Aspirational. So what I don't want to do is throw the baby out with the bathwater on some of the other parts of the corridor that perhaps it is a more appropriate place to have a TOD standard because of this one near very scary miss on
Fidelity.
that
Yes.
one particular project. And I do think what we tried to do a good job of, and staff did a nice job of, is separating the corridor into chunks, which I think Clarion alluded to. And then the other piece is when I asked the question of how do we rate, it sounds like we have less sometimes a procedure or process problems and more a perception or communications problem. So I would look to the chamber. I mean, I feel like we're being a really responsive group, that we're really trying to make some efforts here to help us then promote the fact that maybe there are some misperceptions out there that, because it has carried weight. I go everywhere and say, oh, the TOD's evil, the TOD's evil. And I don't think that people really understand the TOD in the first place. I don't think that they know where the flexibility is, like the consultant pointed out. And so I hate for us to go make a bunch of changes that might, in the end, not necessarily change the outcome when maybe we have a perception problem and not a process problem. So I'd ask for help from the community members who care about this to get that message out there, that we are being responsive, that we are making it flexible where it makes sense. And then let's make the changes that make sense. But let's not overdo it just because there's a perception problem and not actually a process problem.
Mr. Lawson.
And actually, I want to talk about perception problem because, in business, if you piss off one person, they tell 10. If you do a good job for them, they don't tell anybody. So we have this perception problem we need to take care of. And I think we had a meeting not too long ago, Neil, and I told you about a developer, a landlord, and a commercial real estate agent that all three got a bad perception and have said they don't want to do business with us any longer. So that's times 3 now, so that's 30 people that they've told that they're unhappy with us. So that's my issue. And Mike said the right thing is find a way to say yes. Let us be the bad guys. Let us be the ones to put the hammer down. You know, that was my campaign slogan, find a way to say yes. That's really work hard to do that. And all of this will correct itself as far as the perception thing. But we as a city need to be very cognizant of the fact that it's pointed out by our consultant, we have a perception problem. That's an issue.
Yes.
So this one I think we have to work on hard and quickly. So part of your recommendations, when you are looking at the recommendations, is let's look at how we can change that perception. What are the proactive steps we can take to get the chamber involved, the Builders Association, or whoever else, to say, come here, let's look again. Here's the reason why. We want to be the place where you come and do business. Thank you.
So, do you guys have enough direction now? Want it in a form of a motion? What do you look
I don't think I need a motion, Mr. Mayor Martini. We set it up so that if the council wanted to provide direction, we had it agendized so that be the case. There's been some direction come out of here. I think what we will try to do now is summarize some of the stuff, get the report to the council, digest some of it on our own as staff, and create that workshop, agendize the workshop, and we probably will have some analysis and some proposals to the council, and then we can work from there.
Kathy, I have that you want to speak on 6.2. It's wrong up there what you're seeing. We're talking about 6.1. We'll do 6.2 after this one, and I will give you time to speak under public comment. Thank you. Okay, anyone else? Comments, questions? Okay. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Clarion, Angela, thank you. Trey, thank you for coming down, appreciate it. Okay, let's move on to 6.2, request for consideration and possible approval to authorize the fire department to pursue a fire prevention and safety grant through the federal 2011 Fire Act grant process. Mr. King.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, member of the council. Fire Marshal Bob King for record. Here to talk to you a little bit about our Project Safe residential fire smoke alarm program. The first thing I wanted to show you, see if all of you have seen it. This was in the July 15th Sunday paper, and it's something that I'm very excited about. It was a big article on smoke alarms that was in the paper. I sent some information to them, and they did a really good job writing it up for me. And what this is we had one day recently where we had two different fires in the day, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, and both fires, the people that were in the house were able to get out of the house, and they were alerted by the smoke alarms that were in the house. One of the houses, the smoke alarms that were in that house, the smoke alarms that we installed through the first phase of our Project Safe Smoke Alarm program. So we were very excited about it. We felt that was a save right there out of our program, and that's what our program's all about. That's why we're putting them in there. It was a fire in each house. They did not know that the fire was in the house until the smoke alarm went off. It alerted them. They investigated. They found it. One of them was with children that were still in the bedroom. So if the mother or the grandmother would not have heard the smoke alarm, it could have been really bad. But she did, investigated, found them, called 911. We got there, took care of the situation, and everyone was safe. So that's a big kudo for this program. I'm so excited that we actually had a save. I'd rather see none. We don't want to see any incidents out there like that, but our program did actually have a save. So far, we've installed 1,637 smoke alarms, 255 carbon monoxide detectors, 28 hearing impaired devices in 633 homes in our community, and we've educated over 1,700 citizens with this program. So we're very excited about that. Some of the fundraisers that we're doing besides the grant, which I'll talk about in a minute, we've also done two golf tournaments to raise funds for this program, one in 2010 and one in 2011. We raised $8,500 each year for that program, so that was $17,000 that we were able to buy more smoke alarms, more carbon monoxide detectors, and more information to educate the citizens. And then in 2012, we're having another golf tournament, which is coming up next Sunday. And my goal for that one is to try to get just a little bit higher and raise $9,000 for it. I'm really hoping. Right now I have 100 players signed up for it, so I think I'm going to get there. But today, we're here to talk about grants as well. In 2010, you approved and allowed us to obtain a $32,500 grant. 2011, you approved and allowed us to obtain a $57,000 grant, and we used all of that money to purchase the smoke alarms that went into those homes. In 2012, for this year, we've asked to go out and obtain another grant, and that one's for $55,000. And with these grants, they have only a very short window that you can write them. So we got notified. We started writing up the grant, tried to get it submitted, and tried to get here to talk to you about it ahead of time. It didn't work out that well, so we submitted it, and we've actually since then been approved for it. So I'm here today.
I'm going to vote no then. What do you think?
I'm here today not only ask permission on to submit the grant, but to accept it.
Right, ask forgiveness.
Well, knowing things like this happen, I really didn't think there would be a big issue, but we did get approved through FEMA for another $55,000 grant, our third in a row, which is actually pretty amazing to get accepted 3 years in a row for something like this.
You did the right thing, Bob, about going ahead and doing it, and all we could say is no. I mean, it's
Yes.
approved, and, you know, just one comment for me, this is really a great program. I don't know how many other communities are doing this, but this has really worked out well, I think, for some of the older neighborhoods and people who don't have fire alarms, and now, like you said, you got to save. I think it's a wonderful program, and I want to thank you and your people, and really the fire community, people that are in the fire community around this community have kind of come together to help you do this and volunteer and those kind of things. So I think it's wonderful. Questions, Mr. Kerrigan?
Bob, how does somebody go about contacting you to get a fire? I mean, is there what's the criteria for getting you, this fire department, to put those in?
Basically just calling up to the Fire Prevention Bureau, and we schedule it from there with them.
So it doesn't have to do with any kind of economic, how much your house is worth, where you live, or anything like that?
No, our whole focus is to get to all the older homes in Sparks first, but we've installed smoke alarms in some even newer homes. If we go in there and they have newer smoke alarms already, we'll change the batteries for them and put the 10-year batteries in for them, just so they have that as well. But our focus is mainly on the older homes in Sparks. We want to make sure that they all have them, but we'll help anybody out with the program as well.
Okay, thanks.
And we'll advertise it and market it again. But with this grant, we'll go through that whole process once again and market it pretty big.
That's great. Okay, before I get carried away, we do have public comment on this. So Kathy, you want to take your 3 minutes? Now make sure you talk about the fire grant.
Well, I hope you spend it the right way. My name is Kathy Brandhorst, Lisa Marie Presley, John Benet Ramsey, John Steele, and I'm also the United States President. I'm very concerned about this one company, EEE Technology. Now, I found this company, they were setting up fire poles. They're poles with wires all the way across, and they're telephone wires, electrical wires, and these should be included in the safety and prevention of fires. What I'm trying to tell you is that they had men climb up these poles, and they try to disconnect these wires because they cannot be stealing other people's electric or phone service or cable or gas out of their homes. So they climbed up the poles and they were electrocuted because somebody turned it back on to electrocute the gentleman intentionally.
Keep it to the fire, Kathy.
And so I just wanted to let you know, I hope you use this as a fundraiser. Also, the response, on the emergency response. Now, I'm very concerned about the emergency response too, because it took 20 minutes for someone to respond to a fire. The house was burned down to the ground because there's nobody there in the 911 call. Who directed the call to the other city, Sparks, instead of Reno? They were lost.
Kathy,
they did not know where to go.
This is about a grant for...
Yes, that's why I'm mentioning this.
Okay.
Because I'd like the grant spent on something that's needed, in our area, to cover for people, the public, their safety too. And when a house does burn down to the ground, what happens to the people? They're burned black crisp, maybe even to ashes. We don't need that. We'd like to have the response as soon as we call, don't we? Don't we want it in about 5 or 10 minutes? What's 20 minutes to a half hour to 40 minutes to hour before the response team shows up? Who turned on the laser beam to clasp on those wires again, to turn it off and direct it to a different area?
Thank you.
That's wrong. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Mr. King about the grant? Is that it, Bobby?
I actually just wanted to show you one other thing. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but a lot of paperwork to get it done, but the Project Safe logo that we have for this is specific to the city of Sparks. We actually have a trademark on it. We were able to get our own trademark, and so no one else in the world could actually use our trademark for what we're using it for, and I think that's really neat for the city of Sparks.
Great. Good job. Questions? Mr. Smith?
Nothing. I would I'll make a motion, but just to add that you probably get the grant year after year because it's such a good program.
Yep.
And the benefits are there, and it's for people that need these things. So I move to authorize the Sparks Fire Department to pursue a fire prevention or to accept or spend it, a safety grant through the 2011 Fire Act grant process.
Second, Mr. Lawson?
I'll second. And I just have one question, though, Bob. Who else does this around the country other than Sparks?
There are a few places throughout the United States that do it that I've read about. In our local area, we're the only ones that are doing it right now. I think I did hear that Reno just obtained a grant as well to put together some type of smoke alarm program, but for right now, we're the only ones here.
Well, my congratulations on taking the initiative and making something good happen.
Thank you.
Mr. Kerrigan wants to know if it takes 4 of them to put it in.
No, that's 4 councilmen to put it in.
And, you might want to call them and give them some advice over there on what they're doing, so.
You can just attend a different meeting.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I'll probably get a call in the morning from some other mayor from another entity. But okay, we have a motion on the floor by Mr. Smith, seconded by Mr. Lawson. Any further discussion? Seeing none, please vote. Mr. Schmidt? Okay, go ahead and display. Passed unanimously with those present. Okay, let's move on to 8.1, consideration and possible action by the City Council to sponsor an amendment to the 2007 Truckee Meadows Regional Plan to amend Policy 1.2.10 and any other policies related thereto. Mr. Rundle.
Thank you. Jim Rundle, Senior Planner, here to propose a request to the City Council to amend the regional plan. The City Council gave staff direction to move forward with amending the TOD corridor. On the August 2nd, 2012 Planning Commission meeting, staff will be taking forward essentially a proposal to remove what we call the employment district from the TOD. To do that, we will need to have a regional plan amendment because the regional plan defines our corridor specifically. So when we take it to regional planning, it could essentially be found out of conformance. I think that the regional plan governing board members know very well that they've directed regional planning staff to consider those amendments. The Reno City Council has directed their staff to consider amendments to their TOD corridor. So essentially, this amendment should work for the City of Reno and the City of Sparks to have either more general definitions or something to that effect that aren't definitive. So I'm asking that the council sponsor an amendment so that we can move forward with the amendment to the TOD corridor.
Questions for Mr. Rundle? Mr. Lawson?
I'm ready to make a motion.
It's public hearing, so we got to do that first. Sorry.
Okay.
Any questions? Okay, this is a public hearing. I will open it to the public for discussion. Anyone in the public want to talk to this? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Okay, bring it back to council for action. Now you can go ahead there, Mr.
All right, I'd like to make a motion. I move that the City of Sparks sponsor a regional plan amendment to remove the specific reference to the Sparks TOD corridor in policy 1.2.10 of the regional plan.
Do you have a second, Mr. Smith?
Second.
Moved by Councilman Lawson, seconded by Councilman Smith to approve agenda item 8.1. Any further discussion? Seeing none, please vote. Mr. Schmidt? Must have gave up on us. Okay, please display. Passes unanimously with those present. Comments from the city council or city manager? Okay, seeing none. Comments from the public? Ms. Brandhorst.
My name is Kathy Brandhorst, Lisa Marie Presley, John Benet Ramsey, John Steele, and I'm also the United States President. I just wanted to let you know my manager was threatened. And because, you know, he's the one that runs the motel. Nobody else runs the motel. If you are asked to leave the property, why don't you leave the property? Why do you have to show him a gun and say, I'm going to blow your brains out for telling me to leave the property? Well, I just wanted to let you know that is uncalled for. I also wanted to let you know other things too at the bank, like give me your money. I want it from Kathy's bank account, and if you don't give me the money, I guess I'll have to shoot everybody down in the bank to get the money. And this is another thing, again, I wanted to point out. You don't have no right to shoot or kill anybody in the bank because you need money. You need to go out or back to Mexico and make sure you are deported out of the United States. For all these criminal acts that you do in the United States is uncalled for. You don't need to be here in the first place. And I just wanted to make another statement too. All the department stores are very, very upset because they don't ever get money for their clothes, their shoes, or whatever they're going to be purchasing. Instead, they come back in with their machine gun and said, I'm going to steal all this stuff out of the store, whether you like it or not, because I can shoot you all down, and then I can steal all the stuff out of the stores. Well, that's not the way you're supposed to do it. You pay for it. You have a job, don't you? You don't have to steal payroll checks. You don't have to steal from department stores. You don't have to steal from the food markets. The supermarkets are also crying out they cannot afford to even replace the food in the supermarkets anymore because you don't pay for your food. All that is left in the store is blood and flesh from the humans that you had to destroy in the stores. And this is not the way to do it either. The way you're supposed to do it is pay for the food, pay for your clothes, pay for your automobile. You don't have to steal it off the automobile lot, do you? In order to say, I own it, you don't own it. You still stole the automobile.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, next is 6.3, looking for a motion to go into closed door session after redevelopment. Can I get a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Kerrigan, seconded by Councilman Smith to adjourn after redevelopment. Any further discussion? Seeing none, please vote. Please display. Passed unanimously. Okay, we're adjourned to redevelopment. Mr. Smith.
Okay, I'll open the Sparks Redevelopment Agency meeting of 7/23/2012 with a roll call, please.
Chairman Smith, Agency Secretary Patterson, Agency members Ratty,
Oh, I'm here.
Lawson,
Here.
Martini,
Here.
Kerrigan,
Here.
Schmidt, absent. Chief Administrative Officer Driscoll,
Here.
Agency Attorney Adams. Here. We have a quorum.
Okay, I'll open up the public comment. Anybody in the audience wishing to speak? Okay. Kathy Brandhorst, are you here? Okay. Okay. You wanted to talk about the roll call?
Oh,
That's what you put, item number 2.
I did.
Yeah, you did.
No.
Okay, go ahead.
I said number 2 because it says
Okay, okay.
comments from the public.
Your
right
time's
there.
running there, Kathy.
Okay. My name is Kathy Brandhorst, Lisa Marie Presley, John Benet Ramsey, John Steele, and I'm also the United States President. I just wanted to let you know Scott's body was found again on the property where I live. And again, you were told to stay off the property. You do not belong on the property. And we wish you would leave the Kennedys alone. These people already been through enough. They really don't need to keep going through torture and more murders because you need to have a place to live. Now, poor Scott, he moved out of the what is it? Well, anyway, he moved out, and he moved into a house. He moved upstairs. And now they drag him from the house all the way down to the motel for more torture and more murders. And we are getting kind of upset that this little boy is only 6 years old, and you need to back off. You don't need to kill a little 6-year-old boy who's going on 7 years old. And also, I just wanted to mention his brother is Gene, and he is a police officer, but you don't treat him the same way either. His body has been found all over the city. He has been smashed with steamrollers, and he also has been filled with bullet holes because Schimmel was arrested, or Bob Cashel, or maybe it was Charles Hoey, or maybe it could be other people, you know, they're on death row. You don't need to shoot his head off because you were arrested. You were arrested because you already murdered somebody else. You need to go to jail, you need to go to prison, and you need to be executed and destroyed. And I just wanted to mention too, not only that, his sister works at the 9 years old, and she works at the courthouse. She works with the judge, but they are stealing her payroll check, and she's a good worker, I understand. But the person who needs the payroll check, she had to torture her by putting snakes inside her body, and she was in lots of pain. These snakes are still inside her body, but now she is a small baby because they took an electric chainsaw and sawed her all the way down to a baby size.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
Anybody else in the public wishing to speak at this time? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the agency. Approval of the agenda. Anybody want to take anything out of sequence? Or?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Recommendation to approve the minutes of the June 25th, 2012 meeting.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Report of claims and bills approved for payment and appropriation transfers for the period June 7th, 2012 through July 4th, 2012.
Move to approve, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Comments from the agency members? Okay. Comments from the public. Anybody in the public wishing to speak at this time? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the agency. We are adjourned.
Bonus.